Hi, I'm Noam Wasserman, Dean of the SciSim School of Business at Yeshiva University. I was a longtime professor at Harvard Business School, an entrepreneur, and a venture capitalist. I wrote the bestseller, The Founder's Dilemmas.
And I'm Charlie Harary. I've been working with companies for over 10 years. And that book, Founder's Dilemmas, and the challenges faced by the 10,000 founders in it is the basis of this podcast. We are delving into the issues faced by startups to help you avoid the pitfalls that claim so many good companies.
Let's get started.
Welcome back to the show. Last episode, we discussed the different parties that have to go into building a great organization. And where we left off really is in the concept of even if you have the right people, you need to make sure you're clarifying the right roles. That's really the next level of Dean Wasserman's 3 R's, which we're delving into. And in the second R, we're in this world of roles. And it's such an important piece of being able to give clarity for movement. So give us a little bit, if you can, like a high level of what this R means and why it's so important to jump into.
Sure. So when you are architecting things within the team, critical part of what you're doing in the second of the R's, so we started off with the relationships R, then getting into the roles and decision making, and then getting into the rewards, which is going to be a future episode for us. How are you going to be able to have clear roles within the team? A lot of times that comes in the form of titles. A lot of times you're going to have people all coming to the table wanting to be in charge, fighting over who's going to be CEO, who's going to be able to do a bunch of the things when it comes to the core, both internally and externally, having those kind of titles impact that. But then also we're going to have to make decisions collectively when we are one and one, so 2 co-founders, even if it is that we're different. There's going to be the tech decisions that the techie is going to be making, the business decisions the business person might be making. But then what happens when you have decisions that cross those domains? How are you going to collectively be able to make that? And so that's where you're going to be able to have good decision making if you set it up to begin with, or it's where it could be gridlock and the last thing that a startup wants of heightened tensions and slowing down when it comes to that. I remember also to be able to get a little bit into a microcosm of how the R's are connected. First year that I was teaching my course at Harvard, my Founder's Dilemmas course, we had two really good friends in the class, Michael and Jonathan, who went on to become all-stars within that year. They decided to go and co-found a company together. They went and entered the business plan competition, came in second in the business plan competition. They were going to revolutionize the insurance industry. They were 2 best friends, and when they came together, they made a bunch of decisions that flew in the face of the things we were teaching them in class. They decided we're going to be the outliers. We are the founding team that can go and neglect and ignore the rules. A year and a half later, Michael came back to campus for us to debrief on why the company had failed. And what he said is that despite the fact that you showed us that don't go and co-found with a best friend unless you've thought deeply about how you're playing with fire and you plan around those issues. And one of the things that we'll talk about next time around, how we split the equity 50-50 is going to be equal with that. We went and decided when it comes to the roles and decision-making, co-CEOs, we're not going to decide who's going to be the CEO. We're going to decide to together be in that. Said all of those rules that we went and broke are the reasons why we failed. We didn't go and have the difficult conversations. We didn't go and make sure that we were able to architect the team in a robust way. And because of that, all the highest promise of startups, including theirs, are going to have problems around it. It's the kind of thing that the timeless wisdom that our rabbis give us for thousands of years be able to point it to it. That there's all sorts of ways that we see that Chazal, the great rabbis, talk about the problems of having co-CEOs, having 2 people in charge. It's either going to end up with the pot burning or the pot not cooking. There's going to be all sorts of ways in which the ill-structured co-CEO team is going to be problematic for that. Having clear lanes as being a critical part, being able to have clear roles, as we talked about last time, double-checking a box and having 2 people within a domain is also a recipe for tensions and for worse relationships. If you think about why did we have all sorts of problems throughout Bereshis, the first book of in Genesis, the ways in which you're going to have all sorts of interpersonal tensions that were then solved when you look in the second book in Shemot, where we have Moses and Aaron, Moshe and Aaron. Why were they able to have a much more productive relationship going and leading the nation, especially through a whole bunch of trials by fire that they had there? It's because they had clear lanes.
Right.
Moses was very clearly the one who was in charge as CEO of all of this. Aaron was very much the priest in that realm of it. The leadership and the priesthood were very clear definitions between them. Unfortunately, when we go and muddle the two of them by being very similar to our co-founder, the homophily that leads us to be two techies coming together, two business people coming together, that's going to muddle our lanes. It's not going to be clear about the roles that we're each going to have and how we should make decisions around it. And so a lot of the timeless wisdom that we see writ large, that founding teams keep breaking the rules in the hope that they're going to be the ones who can avoid that. Timeless wisdom tells us that you should have a lot more of the clear definition, the difficult conversations about who is in charge and how we're going to make decisions, and not go and ignore them and hope that you're not going to have to face those.
So let's break it down here, because I think what you're saying was resonating in a very deep way. How does a team do that? Let's start from the beginning, because the way I can almost see the way people do. Some people do it is like they pick titles, which are largely just their titles are defined terms, right? It depends on how you define them. There are CEOs that have very little decision-making power, even though they think they have a lot. And then there are, COOs that run the whole company, right? Like it really, the titles I think could be a pump fake, right? So do you go out and start with a job description? Do you go out and start with an equity split? Like, how would you suggest the beginning of this exercise? A team is listening and saying, "You're right. Really, the core of the tension in my boardroom is everyone thinks they do everything, and there's not clarity." So, what would you do to gain that? What's the first step in gaining that clarity?
Well, the first step is, who are you even going to co-found with? One of the early topics that we talked about.
Right, which we had in the previous episodes.
Yeah. If you have a very clear business person on the team and a very clear techie on the team, that maps really easily to being the business lead and the tech lead. When you run into problems figuring out who is going to have what titles, it's a good signal that maybe you shouldn't have co-founded together to begin with. If you're thinking through like which of us is going to be each of these, then that should be a check on the homophily that you had of going and flocking to someone who's similar to me. And so doubling down on it and therefore being able to have all sorts of tensions because of the titles is one of the indicators that you're heading towards issues.
Right.
And so that's where you can skate where the puck is going to be. What title would we have? And if you have trouble envisioning it, then that maybe means they have to back up and rethink a bunch of the ways in which you're going to be coming together with these people.
And I think what happens otherwise, even if it's not an official co-founder, but let's say it's an executive or a high-ranking member, what happens that I've seen sometimes is that there's a whole bunch of pain points in a company. The CEO doesn't want to do any of it, right? He wants to spend all day in vision and being the external face. So he puts together a job description which is like the entire kitchen sink and looks for somebody else. But that's also not really clear, right? It's everything else. It's everything that I don't want to do. So, is the answer to get a better sense of what needs to get done first before you start figuring out who does what? And is that a step that you've seen people skip of just figure it out versus no, what are we trying to accomplish? What do those tasks look like? And now who's doing it, even if there are open boxes?
Yeah, no, it's a key thing that is bypassed way too often. And it goes back to our very simple checklist that we've been talking about before. When you were creating it to decide whether I can be a solo founder or whether I have to go get other people there, you were fleshing out a bunch of the things that have to be done well within this company for it to have the best chance of succeeding. If you go and take that checklist and now you take a look at who am I going to possibly have on the team with me, are we double checking boxes? Are we leaving unchecked boxes? The unchecked boxes should be, how can we game plan about being able to go and bring someone in to be able to check that box for us? The double checked are where we're going to have to make sure that we have very clear role definitions so that we're not going and stepping on each other's toes. And so that very simple mechanism as a check for it, that's also going to flow, by the way, into the third of our R's. Who is doing what? And then putting values on how valuable are each of these things in the checklist. That should be the starting point for how you're going to figure out how to be able to allocate the rewards within the team also. But that's a central thing that's going through each of these themes here.
Yeah.
One of the other critical things is also the combination while we're going and talking across the R's. When you go and co-found with your best friend, one of the past topics that we talked about there, you're going to be, again, avoiding the difficult conversations about which one of us is really going to be able to be the CEO. You're going to be avoiding a whole bunch of the other conversations that are you're going to be punting on when it comes to that. And that's where you're going to be a lot less able to go and craft roles and decision-making approaches that are going to be much more productive for the team. Mm-hmm. There's a couple of metaphors that we can use for the early days of the startup when it comes to these issues, the roles and decision-making, and then how it morphs over time. We use the metaphor of Neverland. So Peter Pan, where they lived, Neverland. Who was there in Neverland? Do you remember from the movie?
I don't remember.
Okay, so it was all of the other boys who were there, It's a metaphor that we can use for where there's no hierarchy, there's no parental supervision.
Got it.
It is all the peers who are there together, being equals. You're punting during the early days by living in Neverland. We're all going to be co-CEOs. It's all one founder, one vote. She is not going to be any more valuable than he is going to be. It's all going to be everyone, with the same amount of say within all of these things there. That's living in Neverland. There's a lot of attractive things to living in Neverland. We all want to have the different lenses coming together, as long as you've made sure that it's different lenses, that they're not bringing the same ones to it and things like that. And a lot of attractive reasons why you all want to be equals, being able to tug and pull at each other and things like that. However, say that you go and now add 3 more people to Neverland. You now have 6 people who are in the team in addition to the 3 initial people. Can you persist with being able to live in Neverland? Everyone all the same, everyone getting a vote and things like that. Now you scale to 10 people. Are you going to be able to remain in Neverland?
Right.
It's going to have all sorts of gridlock tensions, the other things that are going to be problematic that we've talked about before. At some point, you have to transition to a new model, whether we might call Mount Olympus. So having a clear decision maker at the top, Zeus atop the mountain, who's going to be able to be the final decision maker resolving all of these types of issues. Think about, though, the team that got used to living in Neverland. All of us are going to this investor meeting. All of us are going to this meeting to make a decision about our strategy and things like that. And then now that you've transitioned to Mount Olympus, you're going to be saying to one of those co-founders, you're not coming along on this.
Right.
You're not going to be involved in that investor meeting. That's going to be major tensions that you're actually heightening by this very necessary move to a different structure within the team, because you succumb to that natural inclination to live in Neverland. And now as you're trying to move to the necessary structure for a scalable company, for something that's going to be more professionalized, it's actually going to be heightened tensions within the team.
Which is really a symptom of the lack of desire to either think this through beforehand and or have a tough decision, have conversation. Right? Like, think about it. Like, the reason why you even have Neverland is because I don't want to spend the time thinking about that which isn't real today, which is the fully evolved, mature company. We're still just hanging around making this happen. And there's a whole world of that I don't think people fully appreciate if they're in the beginning of it. Like, I've seen teams that start around kitchen tables that only later on, when they're running 200-person companies, have incredibly inherent tensions because the founder doesn't necessarily look at one of the co-founders, so to speak, as equals. And we were around the same kitchen table. And since the roles weren't clear in the beginning, we were around the same kitchen table, right? I was here when. Like, this happens all the time. There's a certain, stripe, if you want, on the shoulder you get when you were around at the beginning of something, and that gives you some level of decision making later on, which it doesn't. And this really does come from a lack of either thought or courage to either think about what the roles are, right? I have a friend of mine he's a big football fan, and he says the clearest thing that he's learned from the professional football is that there is no coach in the NFL doesn't have a depth chart. Like, he doesn't just take the linebacker and be like, listen, the running back just got injured. Like, do you mind? Can you double down? Right? He has a clear, and the owners that are writing out these major checks understand that to even have a shot at winning Super Bowl, you got to actually put people in specific roles. And when you look at a business, it's not like that. People are like, whatever, we'll figure it out. We'll all do something. It's a level of slowing down and being courageous, right? And these muscles seem to be counter the facade of people that just sort of like, woke up one morning, were in the college dorm room, and the next thing you hear from them, their company is exploding.
Yeah. No, within startup teams, there's actually reasons to celebrate it, but also the limitations that you're highlighting around it. Early on, we're all jacks of all trades. It's all very fluid. We can all pitch in different places and be able to move back and forth depending on this day and how we're changing the startup and things like that. being able to acknowledge that comes with perils.
Yeah.
No one is developing expertise in a domain. No one knows who to go to when a particular issue comes up.
Right.
All sorts of ways in which not having those clear lanes for people is going to cause issues for it. And also not having the foresight around scalability and being able to build for scale. So
Sure.
let me give you an example. This is after my going and studying founding teams and also governance, like being able to found a board of directors within your startup and being able to take a bunch of the best practices around it. So we were starting a new high school in Boston. This is almost a decade ago that we were doing it. And what I had seen around a whole bunch of schools is that early on they start off and the board of directors and the rest of the team is in Neverland. And then they have to, as the school is growing, that is starting to limit them. They have to go and completely change the model. And that's going to be all sorts of risking the school when we have all the most precious of our resources, our students, our kids who are there within the school. And so when we created this new one, we went and built a scalable board to begin with, being able to plan it around when we are 50 students, how are things going to look then? And now let's architect it early on to be able to resemble that and be able to have a lot more of a transition into being able to do that. And now we actually just hit 49 students. It is still the same structure of the board and the other things that are going on within the school because we thought down the road to it. And the more founding teams can go and do that, being able to plan around the structure that we're going to need then, and let's have a smoother path than the way in which it's going to be having to blow up Neverland and be able to create much more of Mount Olympus. That's where it's going to be a lot of the challenges that you're going to be able to get past a lot of those tensions around it. We're also talking just, by the way, about two different models that are extreme models. There's a bunch of things in between. There's a bunch of alternate models and things like that. To discuss it, we have to talk about those prototypes. But there's some that I found like are the best ways to be able to do it, being able to have mini Zeuses, mini domains. So for instance, if you went and created your founding team well to begin with, of having the techie, having the business person, each of them can be a mini Zeus within their domain. Have Mount Olympus for tech, Mount Olympus for business, each of them making their own decisions there, not having the tensions of having to check with each other on all these things, that one of them is very clearly the expert and the other one isn't. And that way you have a hybrid between the two models of being able to have these multiple domains and each one being able to make the right calls within each of them.
Yeah. And just to circle this back for a second, and this does require a certain amount of, and this is where I guess of sort of forecasting what's required and being able to constantly be in the game of figuring out who should be doing what, even if that evolves over time, which is I think a unique skill that not everybody follows. This is a new thing that has to get done. Who actually does it? Not all of us. I was working on a project recently, and there was a little bit of tension in the WhatsApp group, which is, I guess, the new version of the boardroom. And one person, after multiple voice notes back and forth, said something that was really right on. He said, "I'm okay with anything, but if you want me to do it, I have to be the last one standing. Meaning, if you want to give this to me, then I have to be able to make a call. If you don't want me to do it, I'm happy to opine, to help, to advise, but somebody has to be the final say. You cannot have a project in which you get to the end of it and then it's governed by committee, because at the end, it has to be somebody's responsibility or it just doesn't get done." Which is, I think, a lot of what you're saying here is that it has to go to somebody or in some mechanism, even if it's a vote of whatever. And if that's not clear, you're just asking for trouble as it gets more complicated, right? I'm even thinking situations where you have an investor who's got a lot of the money down, and he's a limited partner or he's a silent investor. That person's going to have an enormous stake in the decisions that are being made by the professional team. And to have that person just walk in and say, "By the way, we're doing or not doing, it's my money," it could blow the whole entire venture up at the most critical phase.
Yeah, and one of the things that you're highlighting, it brings back to mind from the realm of political science. So Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan used to talk about in Congress, when the rules are not set up until you're facing a decision, so there's going to be a vote and other things like that, everyone is going to be fighting for the decision rule that's going to get the decision to be what they want. It's not going to be the best set up to get to the right decision. It's going to be the decisions that they want that are going to be fighting for. If you can set up the rules ahead of time that it's not right now going to be skewed by a particular thing that is going on, like a particular decision that has to be made, it's going to be a much healthier set of rules that you're going to be able to create, to be able to get to the best of those things in the end. And that exists within founding teams. Go and think down the road to what if we are disagreeing about something. Don't go and deny that we're going to be having tensions and things like that. Say when we are having tensions, now how can we resolve it? And being able to set that up, not when you're going and having the tensions around a specific issue, will be a much healthier way to be able to create something repeatable, something that's going to be a lot more objective and enable you to get to the best decision in the end.
So is there any best practice for doing this, or just start doing it? Like, is there a model to follow? Is there a process, A, B, C, D, E? Is there a standard of which this is really industry standard, this researcher or this way, or is it just jump in, figure it out, and then you'll learn? Just doing it is important. Like just getting on the bicycle is step one. What's someone listening right now and going, you're 100% right. I got to do it. My company is way too ambiguous to be successful. What's their next move to be successful?
So I would say getting on the bicycle with the right expectation set is the critical piece of it. And it's something we actually just brushed by. It's a metaphor from the personal realm that we should be applying also to the professional realm. And that happens to be doing with dating. There's a bunch of uncertainties that you're going to have about any co-founder you deal with. Whether you think, as we talked about in the past, that you know them really well from the social realm, or whether it's someone that you don't really know too well. You have to set the expectations that we're going to go and bite off a chunk right now that's not going to be forever. We are not getting married together. We are still during the dating phase. We're going to set up something that's going to be a real test of ourselves, how we work together as a team, the styles that we all bring to it, the decisions that we make together, and set a defined task you're going to do together. Hopefully it's a holistic project that altogether is going to help move the startup forward. So it's not just wasting time and it's not just busy work or anything like that. But let's go and take some kind of well-defined project and we set the rules that this is going to be a temporary thing we're doing together. And we're going to debrief at the end of it about how well things are going, and each one of us has the option to abandon this project if we see for whatever reason that we think that we shouldn't go forward with it. Very different from saying we're now in this together for life. We are now getting married as co-founders. Do the dating on a project-by-project basis to be able to go and hone that capability, be able to have all sorts of ways you'll learn about each other. If you're both first-time founders, all sorts of ways that you don't, as you were saying before, know even yourself, let alone know what the other person is going to be doing. And so bite off a small chunk, have the debrief, have the option to abandon, and then you'll be able to learn a lot of things from that in the extreme, it'll mean we don't continue. In the best case scenario is going to be we have all sorts of things we've surfaced that we in the debrief are going to be able to talk about the next time we're doing this together. How should we change it? Open up the possibility that you're not just going to be on inertia, that you set this in stone, that it's going to be an iterative process of being able to learn and being able to adapt the model to each other. And so that's where it is. Get on the bike, but do it in the small. Do it in sprints rather than doing it in a marathon, and make sure that you've set up that debrief at the end of it where on the basis of that, we're going to iterate, change, build in the expectation that it's not going to be the same exact model because of what we've learned, and that one of the possibilities is that one of us disappears because we've learned that we should not be continuing as co-founders together.
Which requires founders and leaders to see their business as an entity to itself, right? I think that's really where you're heading, which is working on your business is worthy of time. That if all you do is work in your business and you're making these decisions really quickly, you're not learning anything, and there is an inclination to say, go figure it out. Now my pain is done.
Yeah, one of the things that you're saying is that there is the natural inclination to focus on the substance.
Exactly.
And what you have to also peel away from and force yourself to do is talk about the process.
Exactly.
How well is this process going? How might we be able to adjust it? And so being able to separate the two and explicitly devote time to process is a critical best practice.
And entrepreneurs and founders many times say, that's just not me. Like, I have technical expertise at this thing, or I can sell, or I can build, or I'm in the business. I can hire a consultant. I never can make it in school. There's a lot of excuses why that a founder will give for why the process is not them. And what I'm hearing you say, and I believe to my core, is that's just an excuse. You have no excuse. Right? If you want to build something that's an entity is a entity into itself. It exists. And if all you're doing is living in it and focusing on substance, even if you're great at that substance, you're not putting yourself in a position to be successful as an entity. And that's where a lot of failures come in. It's not because people aren't smart enough. It's because they don't value the work on the business enough. They don't value the slowness of what it's going to take to set it up properly, to test, even to give somebody a one project versus a job. I've seen this. I know you've seen this too. I've seen this before, where like people sitting in a room going, "Who's going to do this? Hey, what about so and so? Hey, so and so, welcome to your new job. Wait. Maybe so and so's not the right guy or woman. Why don't we give so and so a project?" And then, but that requires too much time on the business. I got to get back to doing the business.
Yeah.
If you could
even spend 5 to 10% of your time on process, on working on the business, as you were phrasing it, that is going to facilitate the 90 to 95% far better. And it's going to help you avoid a whole bunch of the issues that, in the end, when there is a blow up, it is going to drain your 90 to 95% down to 0%.
Right.
Because you're going to be so having to deal with this fire that could have been avoided to begin with.
Or when you have the wrong person in there, you won't know for 5, 6, or 7 months. And during that period of time, you're not getting the solution you want anyways. And it's just a question of how much respect you're willing to put into your business to do it right. And that's really, I think, where people trip up. They're too busy doing their business every day that they just stop thinking about how the business operates. And they don't realize the small investment of time leads to much bigger investments later on.
Yeah, just in the theme of dating, it actually brings us back around to last episode. We talked about Harary and bringing her husband into the business and some of the other pieces of that. One of the key things that she unfortunately bypassed with her husband was this dating phase within the business. Bring him in. She gave him a senior title to begin with. There was the assumption that you're going to continue within the business. No planning around a bunch of the pitfalls that she had done a lot better with her mother. And because of that, and because of the fact that they hadn't built their difficult conversation muscles professionally within the business, unfortunately, it cycled downwards and they ended up in divorce.
Oh, wow.
And so being able to bite off a chunk, being able to say, honey, come in for a month right now, like what you had done with your wife, and being able to have it be a definitive amount that they're going to come in, and then say we might abandon if we think that it's not going well, as your wife had the insights to be able to do that. That would have benefited Harary and her marriage far more if they had thought of it in a dating and a contained project that they'd be able to go and do together, rather than saying, okay, we're married within the business, and now that's going to have all sorts of echoes that's going to cause problems within the personal.
And this happens all the time, and you're seeing this especially people that are friends with people that work or were first friends or maybe later friends. It may not be as dramatic as a divorce, but there's cold wars all the time. There's, drifting aparts. There's these relationships that sour because of there isn't the right framework in the professional setting. And since it's not as dramatic as a couple divorcing, people don't focus on it as much, but I think it's commonplace where people that were once friends are now no longer that level of friends. And it was only because they didn't take the time to set up the right frameworks, to build the muscles, and to create these roles and responsibilities. And everything lost. The business wasn't as successful. The relationships were soured. And the founders looking, going like, I don't understand. I had my best year ever. And we could talk about this maybe in another episode. Like, I found where this manifests mostly is in the middle, right? The gross profits are better than ever, and no one knows what's going on, but they're not making as much money. And I find this is where all this manifests. It's in that middle zone of the inefficiencies that cost them extra dollars, and it's the roles that have dilution of hours, and you don't really have one moment or one line item where that's dramatic enough where you go, this is what's causing the business to fail. But at the end of the year, because you didn't spend your 5-10% on the process, even though your sales guys are delivering and the product is delivering, it's not trickling down properly. You're not making the money you thought you'd make. The fingers start pointing, the relationship's sour, and it's really in a way because you just didn't spend the time on the business.
Yeah, so let me just go and wrap the first 2 hours that we talked about before we go into the rewards piece of it with a little bit of a reflection from my own personal experiences. Back when I was doing my MBA, I also worked as a venture capitalist. And within the firm that I was working for, they were about as generalized a firm as you could. They were technically a tech investor, but their biggest investment had been in kitchens, etc. So like a retailer. They would do early stage, late stage, almost anything. They would be open to taking almost any good deal that they wanted to go and take. They had one rule of what they would not take a look at. They would not take a look at a business that had been founded by couplepreneurs.
Wow.
two significant others who had come together.
Wow.
And I've found since then that is actually a relatively common rule across a lot of venture capital. I actually think in a lot of ways it is a big mistake to have that rule, because I think there's two very different types of couplepreneurs, and as a model of what we've been talking about until now. They're the ones who default to the natural human inclinations, not being able to being able to fight well muscles, not going and dealing with the relationships issues that we're going to be facing and the roles and decision-making challenges that we're going to have, punting on all of those kind of discussions. And then there are the couplepreneurs who go and acknowledge the risks that we are taking. We are playing with fire. Let's go and make sure that we're having the elephants in the room be discussed. Let's make sure that we are creating the firewalls when it comes to disaster plans and other things like that. If I see the second of those teams come in my door, I am jumping at the chance to be able to invest in them. Mm-hmm. I am not running the other direction.
That's great.
It's not only because no one else is going to be competing for that. I'm going to have, I'm not going to be in a bake-off in terms of giving them best valuation and things like that because everyone's been scared off of it. It's because they have the muscles to be able to succeed where others can't. They've been able to build a whole bunch of things about being able to think about pitfalls, being able to identify and worked on them. That says to me, this is an all-star team. If it is someone who has been able to go and together be able to say, we acknowledge the risks that we're taking, we are working on them, here's our game plan for how to go and do it. And so I think that encapsulates a whole bunch of act on the best practices, acknowledge, and then be able to have the prescriptive be able to work for you rather than working against you.
I think that's a great concept. And that's going to inform later on the episodes on family businesses and couplepreneurs.
Okay, let's take a look at some of the takeaways from the things that we took a look at in this episode. A telltale sign of avoiding difficult conversations is declaring that everyone is equal in the decision-making, maybe even splitting titles or positions, like doing co-CEOs. Having co-CEOs is very unstable and leads to many problems. If you cannot think of distinct titles for each person, that's a red flag for the team. Think long-term about how the initial roles and decision-making approaches will have to change over time, and set the expectation explicitly and recurringly early on that they will change. If you're starting in the common Neverland structure, plant the seeds of eventually moving to a Mount Olympus structure. Even-numbered teams can face gridlock in their decision-making, heightening tensions and slowing progress. Create decision rules ahead of time that will enable you to make decisions rather than waiting for when gridlock hits and everyone is then trying to skew the decision rule to get to the particular decision that they want. In your focus on substance, allocate at least some time to thinking about, discussing, and monitoring how you're doing with the process within the venture. These are at least some of the takeaways that have occurred to me. We'd love to hear some of your own. Please email them over to us. We would love to be able to see at foundersdilemmaspodcast@gmail.com. The other things that you're taking away from this, I learned a tremendous amount from my students. As we saw in the Tanis Daf Zion in the Talmud, that I've learned some from my teachers, more from my peers, but the most from my students. The slide that I used to end my semester at Harvard, thanking my students for teaching me, we would love to learn from you and your reflections. So please send them over if you have other takeaways that you had from today.
On the next episode, I think we're going to get into the rewards piece of the R's, and we'll really round out these 3 R's. And so we're looking forward to that. Thanks so much for listening, and we look forward to seeing you next time.